Hello and welcome to Political Business. I'm Nathan Parsad-Wyatt, former Conservative Party candidate and advisor.
And I'm Kevin McKeever, a one-time Labour parliamentary candidate, staffer and advisor to some of Britain's biggest brands.
We've both stood for elections, we both advised on how to win elections, and our advice continues here on this podcast as the landscape around politics shifts. Whether politically, economically, socially or technologically, old approaches no longer cut through. Welcome to Political Business.
On today's episode, is Keir Starmer facing a genuine leadership challenge?
And with 2 weeks to go, we're assessing what business actually wants from the budget.
And back to London's local elections. We'll bring you inside our event this week in Southwark.
So let's begin with a big story today. We're waking up to front pages with Wes Streeting's name plastered all over them. But the briefing from Number 10 that seemingly they've been forced to intervene and promise that Sir Keir Starmer is ready to fight against any challenge to his leadership. As I said, among those said to be circling are Health Secretary Wes Streeting, the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, even Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, and Angela Rayner being the kingmaker. Kevin, I imagine your phone's been blowing up this morning with WhatsApps and calls. Just unpack this a little bit for us. What is actually going on and what's the thinking behind Number 10's intervention?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a move by key figures, or a key figure in 10 Downing Street, to bounce Wes Streeting into a public statement of support. It's no coincidence that the reports or the briefing to favoured journalists last night was the day before Wes was due to announce some big moves on the National Health Service, but also was due to go out on the morning round, i.e. doing all the key broadcast slots, including Today programmes, Sky, etc. Some people said to me, it seems very poor comms to try and bounce Wes the day before he's about to do the full suite of media. But I think that was actually the point. It's from inside the bunker, pushing Wes to make a statement of loyalty. I think there's some questions from members of the Parliamentary Labour Party this morning about whether or not that's the best use of Number 10's time and political efforts to be briefing against one of its most loyal and effective communicators. More than one MP messaged me whilst Wes was speaking on the Today programme in particular to say that in the last 30 seconds, Wes has demonstrated why he's head and shoulders above others in the cabinet as a communicator, and in particular head and shoulders above the Prime Minister. So I think this is an effort by Morgan McSweeney and those around him to shore up the Prime Minister's position. I don't think it will have had that effect.
No, Wes did a pretty good job, I think, on the broadcast round this morning at effectively saying it was categorically untrue. This is people that are briefing from Number 10 but don't represent the Prime Minister's views, and very publicly saying that. But it does feel extraordinary just 2 weeks before a budget to be having this chatter for Number 10 to effectively be briefing against sitting cabinet members the day before they go and supposedly talk about the NHS and the investment in the NHS. It does seem that this is a bit dysfunctional as an operation, if this is the level to which Sir Keir Starmer feels that he's under threat.
I think it's partly an operation that believes its own hype about how effective it can be, but has never actually been properly tested on decent strategic communications, would be my analysis, both as a Labour person and as a PR strategist. People talk about rolling the pitch for the budget. This is rolling the pitch for the day after the budget by trying to have a scorched earth policy around the Prime Minister to prevent any challenge against him. And that's why they've gone for the tallest poppy in Wes Streeting. Keir Starmer, of course, famously is in favour of tall poppies, but his team appear to have gone after the tallest one of all. The budget lands poorly. The Prime Minister's ratings go down. They can say, this is not just a budget. It's to do with disloyalty within the cabinet. So you start to queer the pitch on the post-budget political rationale attacks on the Prime Minister. I think this is, in essence, about scorched earth. It's about the day after the budget, and it's about protecting the Prime Minister at all costs. What this is about protecting the integrity of this Labour government, the Labour Party or the Parliamentary Labour Party. And I think Number 10 will move the day they made the move against Wes.
Yeah, I think, well, they're absolutely right. And I think that what you've just articulated shows you some of the divisions that are emerging within the Labour Party this morning. I think the real challenge is that once these things start to be discussed, can you really put leadership back into Pandora's box?
Well, I think that's right. Look, you talk about divisions, but also what I saw this morning was lots of forced unity. Chaos and opposition can create some strange bedfellows. Wes is in particular, in the whole time talking about Wes Streeting, other leadership candidates are available. But Wes itself is a bridge builder. He remarkably, post the deputy leadership election, there's been a Damascene conversion to Team Wesley, I'm told, by the new deputy leader, Lucy Powell. Wes maintains personal relationship with Angela Rayner. I think part of the problem in Number 10's approach last night, which they wrote back on this morning, but it's too late, as you said, the genie's out of the bottle, is that they've forced people to think beyond Keir Starmer and the alliance that would be required to remove him. Lots of people compare this, or what could happen with Labour, positive and negatively, to changes of leaders under the Conservative Party. But let's remember, it's much, much easier to get rid of and swap out a Tory Prime Minister, a Tory leader, than it is a Labour one. It's actually a very, very difficult process to challenge a Labour leader and remove them. You have to have 80 members of Parliament to even trigger a potential contest. If the Prime Minister doesn't resign, he's entitled to be back on the ballot paper. You remember the challenge against Jeremy Corbyn in 2016 with Owen Smith. And then that any candidate has to get 80 MPs, and then that goes to, and they have to get constituency Labour parties and trade unions, and then it goes to the membership. So it's very difficult compared to the Tories. You can't have an overnight shift where someone else walks into Downing Street the next day. And that's playing to Number 10's advantage. So they're briefing Labour MPs what? They're telling them, I'm told, 1, look at the markets. MPs had a presentation from former minister and colleague of mine, Kitty Usher, who told them that the shifts in the gilts markets were primarily boosted by leadership speculation. I think that's an interesting analysis, and one that was challenged privately by former economists and bank people who worked in the city who were in the room, I'm told. And secondly, that the public wouldn't forgive the removal of a sitting prime minister. And thirdly, that careful what you wish for, because if you go to the Labour Party membership, they're going to elect someone from the left of the party. Remember Jeremy Corbyn. So I think that's probably the strongest card people have got, because remember the recent past is quite a wake-up call for many Labour MPs. That's also what, by the way, remember the past, where I think Ed Miliband won't do as well amongst the Parliamentary Labour Party as he might hope, because quite a few people have said to me, who were candidates along with me in 2015, they don't want a repeat of that election. So it's hard to get rid of a sitting Prime Minister. But now they've started the conversation. Downing Street is briefing against its own cabinet ministers. That's going to force at some point a reaction from the Prime Minister to either own or disown his own operation.
Exactly.
And that won't end well.
Yeah, and I think this is the thing, is that, Number 10 have put this at the centre of a national conversation. Nobody else. I mean, we've seen briefings now for weeks. I think probably a lot of people hadn't fully realised potentially how precarious the Prime Minister's position is. But for Number 10 to brief this out has meant it's leading the BBC News, it's leading all the front pages, it's a credible source, and a concerted strategy. I take the point that, as a Tory, that it's much easier to get rid of Tory leaders than it is to get rid of Labour ones. But you do sort of wonder, as soon as Prime Ministers start saying, I'll fight on, I'll face down any leadership challenge, I'll keep going, just how long you can actually sustain that for. I mean, Theresa May, she said this, I think she was gone within 16 days. Liz Truss said, I'm a fighter, not a quitter. She was gone a day later. Even Boris Johnson said, being Prime Minister is difficult and I'll go on making the difficult choices, only to be gone a day later. So, I think the question has potentially moved from, should Starmer go as Prime Minister, to how long does Starmer have left as Prime Minister?
I think that's probably right. The one minister said to me this morning that had reminiscing about the John Major days, back me or sack me. He said, unfortunately, if Number 10 were to ask that question to the Parliamentary Labour Party, they will probably choose sack him rather than back him. So history isn't always the predictor of the future. There are many MPs who obviously look at the polls, and this government's been behind the polls for at least 6 months.
Yeah,
this isn't an aberration. It's a trend. So all those MPs who won in 2024 think, well, if we carry on our current course, I'm going to lose. So let's roll the dice and see if someone else can do better. It doesn't help those around the Prime Minister for the last 18 months saying basically how much they disdain Labour MPs, I think the phrase used this week is they are feral, and then expect them to back their man. I think it's very bad politics, and no amount of having an awkward conversation in the smoking room is going to help the Prime Minister, I think, at this point. I think it's probably gone too far. They've taken many Labour MPs for fools, and that's going to backfire, I think.
I was talking to a senior Conservative this morning just to get their take on it, and they, I think, were giving other members of the Conservative Party a bit of a reality check, which is, this is just 15 months since Labour won a huge landslide, and the senior Conservative said to me, if Starmer fell, it shouldn't be conflated with Labour falling early. They have a massive majority, and it could go on, and the worse it gets, the longer they do go on.
Yeah,
and so that's just a little bit of the mood from the Tory party. Not sure what the mood is from Reform. I've reached out to a couple of sources to see. I suspect that they will just be sitting quietly, waiting for the chaos to unfold.
Well, and a senior Green Party friend of mine did message to say the uniparty in action. So that will be their message. Here they are, Labour behaving like the Conservatives. I think, and actually, indeed, a Liberal Democrat friend of mine said as well. Great news for us. Implosion from Labour emulating the Tories. As always, here at Lowick Kedry, we get news and views from across the political spectrum.
At Lowick Kedry, we help our clients make sense of a complex world and get things done. Whether it's shaping policy, delivering major projects, or managing your reputation, we bring together deep experience and fresh thinking to get results that matter.
And now you hear it every week on our podcast. Subscribe on Apple, on Spotify, YouTube Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And we'll drop into your feed every week.
To bring all this back, because I think, to quote Wes Streeting, this is a Westminster bubble story at a time where we should be talking about the issues facing the nation. We are 2 weeks today from Rachel Reeves getting up on her feet and delivering her second budget.
I need to open that door on my budget advent calendar.
You do. What policy will be flown in the Times today?
What horror is behind the door?
Yeah, exactly.
Taps a little.
It's just a week after Reeves gave that speech at number 11 or 10. Well, number 9. Sorry, you did correct me last week.
No,
I didn't take it in. Well, it wasn't. It was the briefing room in number 9.
Number 9.
Oh, there you go. Okay, fine. There you go.
I know it's probably. I've been in Downing Street more recently than you, Doctor, to remind you about.
It's been 15 months since I was late. We were told just a week ago by Rachel Reeves in what I still think, reflecting on it, was a slightly odd press conference, saying, there's no money, difficult decisions are going to have to be made. Therefore, we're rolling the pitch for breaking our manifesto commitments, particularly on income tax. Difficult times ahead. It's going to be a challenging budget. Everyone needs to pay a little bit more. There's subsequently been a lot of briefings about those Labour defines as working people, which seems to be those earning £50,000 or less, being protected.
47,500.
There you go. Sorry, 47,500. Well, depending on where inflation goes over in a couple of weeks' time, it may well be 50,000 by the end of the week. But look, trying to protect those on, lower incomes, they've got themselves into a bit of a mess on that. But what I find interesting is there's then this conversation against that backdrop about the 2-child benefit cap, which we know is an extremely important issue to Labour MPs and backbenchers, but also told former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has been meeting with Rachel Reeves to make his own case on this. And it seems that
nobody likes children growing up in poverty, at least on the Labour benches.
Nobody does, but I think you've got to, as George Osborne used to talk about, this is a moral issue of value to taxpayers, parental responsibility. And actually, when you look at the polling on this, nearly 60% of the public don't think the cap should be released. So you do sit there and say, well, who is it that the government's talking to when they're saying they're going to do this? And again, it goes back to Labour MPs and Labour backbenchers. And, so you've got this in a, slightly more popular policy position in the WASPy women, and perhaps reopening the settlement for WASPy women and payments for them too. But so you've got these sort of spending commitments being talked about at a time where we're talking about tax rises because difficult decisions need to be made. And I think it's very difficult for a government, notwithstanding what's happened in the last 24 hours, where the story is now something completely different. If you were doing ordinary pre-budget comms, it's very difficult for the government to say, this is going to be a difficult budget, therefore we're going to make difficult decisions, but here's a bunch of giveaways on welfare. The country is not aligned with that. And I think it's very difficult framing. So how's that going down in Labour circles?
Well, I think there's a usual caveat that what you're referring to rightly is budget briefing and kite flying. So this isn't a day-by-day briefing of what's going to be in the budget. And it's exactly that.
But in your mind, do you think in your mind income tax will be, that pledge will be broken and income tax goes up? And do you think the two-child benefit cap
will not end up paying more tax?
Yeah, but do you think income tax will go up and the two-child benefit cap will be increased to 3 or some kind of change to the third
child? Let's come to the
child?
cap in a second. There's actually 2 policies. It's often conflated by those that don't follow child poverty issues that closely. So the first is, well, do I think there'll be a potential rise in income tax? I think there will. Yeah. I think for those earning below, whether it's 50 grand, I think that'll be offset by national insurance being cut. So I think so that is this contortion that the Labour is getting into, which is for most people, your ordinary working people, the pledge will not have been broken in that you'll not be paying more tax. I think the politics that's very difficult, but I'm just explaining that sort of.
I understand.
When it comes to the benefits, there's 2 things. There's the 2-child limit, which is if you have more than you can't claim child benefit for the third and subsequent children. Yeah, and then there is the overall benefits cap. Now, there's what I understand, there's no suggestion that the benefits cap is going to be raised. So what that means is, some people, because of the rise, because of inflation, etc., because of and the rise in, therefore, the uprating of benefits, including child benefit, that the subsequent children beyond the 3rd or 4th will probably be hit by the benefit cap anyway. So it's going to be slightly awkward in that it's not going to be an infinite giveaway. I think the signal, however, is you're absolutely right. That this is saying to Labour MPs, one of the core issues that got you involved in politics is social justice and inequality, and in particular children growing up in poverty through no fault of their own. No, the right talk about feckless parents, the left talk about it's no fault of the children. And that is an ideological debate. Labour MPs will feel good about that. Yeah, what they came into politics to do, which is, take children out of poverty, is being done. And I think they're absolutely right to think that. And yes, the right-wing press and
it's the country. It's the country on this issue. They think 60% of the country don't think it's
it depends, as you know, it depends how you ask the question. Do you think children should grow up in poverty? No. Do you think you should subsidise other people's kids? No. So, it's possible for the public to hold 2 contradictory thoughts at the same time. Let's not be naive about that. So I think that will land well with Labour MPs. The WASPy women issue, I think, is interesting. That's one where they were very, very, very vocal, well organised. Women in their they're now in their 60s. Yeah, they wouldn't have been. Yeah, when I was running for Parliament, they were in their 50s, and they were, pretty in your face. Yeah, effective campaign. And I think when Labour MPs are looking at their voter coalitions, that's one group they think they can get back. So that will go down well with Labour MPs. I think it is potentially intellectually challenging to put that together as a package and say, Labour is increasing spending here without an increase in taxation here. I think the third element of that trifecta has to be reducing spending here. Whether or not that will be signalled in the budget, I don't know, but I do know that that's something that's been looked at DWP in terms of reducing benefits. I think the government's not is not blind to this, that they know there has to be the balance of spending in the right place in order to achieve political objectives, and that includes raising children out of poverty, because that's what Labour will get in business to do, and also control the public finances. I think, whether or not it'll be hinted at in the budget or stated, I don't know, but politically they know absolutely that's the case. And I'm pretty sure a large chunk of the, that may well become a dividing line in a future leadership contest. The framing is difficult. I think the primary audience now is the Parliamentary Labour Party.
Which is extraordinary, isn't it, when, this is a pretty decisive budget for business, for growth, for the government to achieve their stated aims when they were elected just 15 months ago. And I thought it was interesting looking at what some of those businesses have been saying in the run-up to the budget.
What have they been saying?
Well, looking at the budget submissions, and Bloomberg helpfully put together an article talking about what business representatives, what the lobby groups actually want to see. The first is keeping taxes low on business. We know that at last year's budget, businesses disproportionately bore the burden of the £40 billion worth of tax rises. They don't want that to be repeated. And I think we've seen some of the consequences of some of that this week, with employment being slightly higher than forecast. Business confidence is not as high as it could be. Some of that's global factors for sure. But clearly, it wasn't a good budget on the tax front for business last year. The second is energy prices. We now have the highest energy prices basically in the Western world, and that just increases your cost of doing business day to day. That is having a material impact on businesses being able to function, recruit, invest in productivity, etc. And the third, of course, is the Employment Rights Bill, which seemingly is now being discussed, elements of it being debated. Clearly, Angela Rayner was the sort of flag bearer for that policy and that piece of legislation and putting it through Parliament. Business has used the budget as an opportunity to say, actually, some of this will be difficult. And so it's a reminder that against all the backdrop of us talking about leadership challenges and, the framing within the Labour Party of different tax and spend measures, what business wants is to get on, both reducing regulatory burdens on them and also the tax burden. Is the government listening, do we think, on some of those measures?
I think the government is. I mean, the one pledge that's not going to be broken is the one on corporation tax, for instance. I think it's definitely listening to big business. What I would say on what business wants in advance of the budget, no business is ever going to say they want to pay more tax or to give workers more rights. So there's a bit of they would say that, wouldn't they, from a political perspective? If they didn't want this Labour government, all of them. So there's a bit of a kind of reality check, which is, turkeys aren't going to vote for Christmas.
Yeah.
I think the government is listening. I think that's partly why, by the way, we're looking at income tax rise rather than other measures which could otherwise be inflationary, because that is obviously the biggest threat to both business and ordinary families and the public finances, which is inflation, which is not coming down as fast as we'd like, and in fact it's been a bit toppy. So I think the government is listening. Its overall objective is to stick to those ironclad fiscal rules, which ultimately is in the interest of UK PLC. I think on the employment rights issues, again, this is kind of why Labour people get into politics.
Exactly. Labour government doing Labour things.
A lot of the measures are enacted by secondary legislation and by ministerial order. So, who knows, we might see. I think there's some concern around issues like day one employment rights. What's pointed out to me by, in particular, the former business secretary, is that actually most businesses already fulfil about 80% of the what would become obligations in the Employment Rights Bill. We do.
Yeah.
So actually, it's often the worst businesses that shout the loudest. Lots of businesses already meet voluntarily as a good employer what become obligatory in the Employment Rights Bill. Actually, when it comes to employment, I remember the cabinet said to me at the weekend, to talk about employment rights, saying they should be more worried about what's happening with the rise of AI and the kind of bloodbath in the service sector, which is a large part of the unemployment numbers. It's something that perhaps isn't being talked about enough by the business community because they're being slightly disingenuous about what they're doing, particularly in the city, in the service sector, to legitimately reduce their costs. That's not government's fault. They're just reducing or slowing down their hiring due to the adoption of technology, which is perhaps something we shouldn't be shy about. We should be having the conversation about retraining and making sure Britain's at the forefront of those sorts of future jobs. So
we should definitely unpack that on a future episode for sure.
We can also, here at Like we're right at the heart of this, working with Google on their AI training program for the next generation of workers. So it's something we're very close to. But I would say on business, I think Treasury is listening. I don't think business is going to be as hit as it was last year. Hence, we're having the conversation about income tax. But lots of businesses would say that, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
When it comes to regulation, remember, business scream murder at the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, the economy is going to collapse. No, what collapse was exploitative labour practices?
I think it's about
for businesses predominantly owned by Conservative MPs. I seem to remember at the time.
There's absolutely no justification for that whatsoever.
There's Peter Bone, MP for Wellingborough, who said in the chamber that the economy would collapse and instruct the minimum wage. It didn't. Wow. Because he was paying people £1.50 an hour in 1998. So actually, there's justification. There's evidence.
I do think there is an argument for stopping the budget as a single event. We have 3 months of speculation about what is going to be in it. There's paralysis across the business community whilst they wait and see what measures. There's paralysis in consumer confidence. See retail figures not as strong as they otherwise would be because people are concerned about.
There's definitely been a lag in spending and hiring. Yeah,
and it's just, do we need to have this? I think there is a legitimate question in the 21st century news cycle.
Yeah.
Do we need to have this endless speculation? It's very damaging.
Well, I think that's partly because it was supposed to be a one and done last year, and it's now twice as nice.
Yeah.
So hopefully I won't have to come up with a nice rhyme.
Three times
3 times unlucky, 3 times lucky, 3 times a charm, I think they say in Dublin. That's the whole point, of course, about fiscal headroom, which is why there's going to be higher tax raises in this budget to create the fiscal headroom to stop speculation. So there shouldn't be, this time next year, a fundamental, who's going to be hit next, because the fiscal headroom's there. And arguably, had the Chancellor built in an extra 10 billion.
Well, originally,
in this position now. But who knows where we're going to be?
Well, that's
if you believe Nigel Farage, Nigel told us, was it last Monday?
Yeah, last Monday.
Nigel told us on
election in 27
fringes of his event is that there'll be a sovereign debt crisis in Q1 of next year. In which case,
we shouldn't laugh at it because it's entirely possible that they could.
I'm not laughing at it at all. And someone else said this to me when I was in Washington as well. There could therefore the spring statement could become another budget. Remember, we've effectively for a long time had 2 budgets.
Yeah.
So at least we've got away from that.
That's true. 2 weeks to go. There's actually a couple of big data points still to come before we get to that point. One is the inflation figures, which you briefly touched on, which I think are on the 19th of November. So that will set the scene. And also public sector net borrowing, which that figure that's watched pretty closely. Yeah. That's on the 21st of November, so just before the budget.
And that will be after. So the OBR runs the rule over the budget. The first return to the Treasury, I think it was Monday night.
Yeah.
And so, there'll be the second one in a week and a half's time.
Right to the wire.
Right to the wire. The OBR, the bird that needs its wings clipped. Anyway, that's enough on the budget, the Treasury, and our friends of the OBR sitting in the small room at the Ministry of Justice.
Let's bring it back to London, shall we?
Absolutely. Let's get back to the street. As listeners will know, it's the London elections next year. It's not just, of course, a test of Keir Starmer or whoever may or may not be Labour leader at that point. It's actually about who runs London government in the 32 boroughs. We have a series of events with key figures, leaders from across London local government. Last week we had Sarah Keir, the relatively new leader of Southwark in Labour-controlled Southwark, to speak to clients and friends about the challenges and opportunities of particularly property development, housing delivery in the borough. We also touched on what it's like to run a London borough at a time of spending constraint, and a time when the government, of course, is rebalancing some of its funding formula to take money away from central inner London and send it outside. But Sarah was actually clear that before we get to the politics of the re-election, that she did say there were some green shoots, particularly in the development sector in Southwark, which is an inner London borough of South Thames, which was encouraging. I think some of the assembled developer audience there were part of some of those green shoots. So that is good to see. There was some chat about the budget. But of course, what most people wanted to know was, would this leader be here in a few months' time? And Sarah we had a very good chat about the rise of the Greens. Yeah, the platform that they're standing on, which is pretty populist, oppositionist, I think that I've described it is having a cake and eating it and then taking someone else's cake and eating that. But also in Southwark, the rise of the Liberal Democrats as well, who are in resurgence in the northern half of the borough. She said, not to break any confidences, but the mood amongst Labour leaders in London is tense. Yeah, it's fair to say that the elections in 2022 were a high watermark for Labour in the capital. So they do expect to make losses in terms of number of councillors, but of course losses potentially in terms of control. When it comes to Southwark in particular, if the election were today, we'd expect to see Labour maintain control of the borough, but with a significantly more Liberal Democrat councillors in the north and Green councillors across the borough, and particularly in parts of the south. And what does that mean for the development community? It means that the politics of planning is going to get more febrile from next May. It's going to be much more, a more difficult conversation to bring the Greens on board, who are often quite NIMBY-ish. Yep. The Greens generally, when it comes to housing, believe there's a housing crisis, but believe that, everything that's been proposed is not good enough.
It's not pure enough.
So, exactly. So again, wonderful cognitive dissonance there. So that will become harder. And the Liberal Democrats as well will be on a platform of looking to take the parliamentary seat in the north of Southwark in particular, but will also be looking to knock points off the Labour administration. So in Southwark, we would expect at the moment heavy caveat, depending, this is a week-by-week situation when it comes to the polls and the voters. We'd expect Labour to maintain control of London Borough of Southwark, but with a reduced majority, with impacts on the delivery of planning in particular when it comes to our client base.
More on the London elections in future episodes. That probably about brings us to the end, but Kevin, we always end these podcasts with our 3 pieces of advice for the week.
The first one on national politics is don't believe any claim or speculation coming from a cabinet minister until it's been officially and formally denied.
The second is the OBR forecasts are going back and forth at the moment and the budget is not yet written. So there's still some time to think about what actually might be in the budget. So don't get too excited about everything you read in the papers on a daily basis.
And third, London is changing. The political kaleidoscope of the capital is going to be shaken in May next year. To keep over that, to politically manage the risk, particularly in the development sector, then get in touch with us and the Lowick Kedry team.
Thanks for joining us on Political Business, where we give you our trusted advice in the changing landscape all around us.
To get more of what you've just heard, subscribe to the podcast and join us each week. Look us up online, add us on LinkedIn, find out more about what we do. Speak to you next week.
Bye now.